Welcome to SEC Football Live here from the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and I am joined by one of my favorites in the business from The Athletic, recruiting editor, college baseball guru, and just all around pretty good person, Mitch Light. How are you, sir? Good to see you, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
That's good. I'm doing well. That's my goal in life, is to be a pretty good person. I think I've reached that bar, you know.
You're a pretty fair, average human.
I'm an okay dude. I'm an okay dude.
Excellent editor. Average dude.
That's fine. That's fine. Fine by me. So I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
That's where we are. No, good to have you, man. We got a lot of stuff to get to today. Some new expansion rumors are sort of swirling around the internet. We'll kind of debunk some of them, but also have a little fun with them because, as I've been saying, and you and I have talked about this, I've talked about this on all of the other shows as well, I do think expansion is coming much sooner than anyone anticipates. I think there's legal language and stuff in the playoff contract that tells us that 2028 could be the year, look-in language as they call it, that 2028 could absolutely be the year that we see expansion for both the Big Ten and the SEC. But I want to float some ideas with you, Mitch, today that might maybe create a different strategy or a different direction that we might be going, and just sort of see if that's something that could be real. Again, Kansas, what? So we'll have a conversation about some of the rumors that are floating around on the internet this week. New win totals are out for all SEC teams. And instead of going on all 16 teams and asking you to pick, Mitch, I'm going to ask you a few that you like, a few that you don't like, some teams that you think are overrated, that are underrated, and, of course, go from there. There's some playoff scenarios that I don't think, and you and I have spent a lot of time working together, even in 2014 when the playoff came around. I don't think we truly, all the way understood the implications of that when it happened. We knew what we were going to get, but there were so many tentacles, and I don't think anyone is prepared for what 2024 is going to look like, because it's not just a new playoff system. It's SEC with no divisions and two new teams. The Big Ten, same deal. ACC now has, Cal and Stanford. So
right. And maybe I'm getting ahead of us. And by the way, I want to preface this by saying I'm glad you pay attention to all the expansion rumors. I take a wake me when it's over approach. So if you just want to tell me one day that Kansas is playing South Carolina, it's a league game, I'm all for it. Just, I don't need to know how just show me the baby, put it that way.
Yeah, I got you.
But I forgot what I was saying before that. So going back, going from the BCS championship game to the college football playoff, while the field, quote, doubled, it still didn't affect 99% of the teams out there. Now, so many more teams are involved because you've obviously got 12, but when you've got 12, you've got 20 teams who think they should be up until the final month of the season. So that's why we have to retrain the way we think about things, because it affects so much more of the college football landscape than going from 2 to 4 did.
Completely. And again, I think there are 2 or 3 or 4 things that I don't think we've really grappled with as fans or media yet, in part because it's May, but also I just think we need to be having some conversations in preparation for stuff, because I think it's going to be so different. To your point, it's going to affect so many teams in so many different ways. It's going to affect how we evaluate coaches.
Yes.
Like Kirby Smart goes 10-2, but keeps making the playoff. How do we evaluate that? Dan Mullen's teams at Florida would have made the playoff all 3 years.
And you'd be right about Dan Mullen being a good coach.
I've always been right about Dan Mullen being.
Can I drink on a live?
Yeah.
With my coffee on live YouTube. Okay.
Yeah, do whatever you want. No, Dan Mullen was a great coach at Mississippi State. He was a below average recruiter at Florida.
Yes.
But all 3 of his teams would have finished in the top 12 if there's
really okay.
Yes.
Okay.
All 3 of them. All 3 of them would have finished in the top 12. So
again, it's for his time or ahead of his time. I don't. Yeah.
He's something, that's for sure. He'll tell you.
He's a good analyst, by the way.
He is.
Yeah, good comment.
Brian Kelly. So this is a bit of a humble brag, but the reason we didn't have a show last week was because I was filling in for Feinbaum, and Brian Kelly had just said basically this long meandering explanation about roster management, which essentially is the exact same strategy that I think I would argue Nick Saban, Jim Harbaugh, Kirby Smart have all deployed. Said that, basically, but the one line gets pulled out of context and it's like, oh, but we're not going to pay players. That's not what we're going to do here at LSU. And so the media, fans, everybody loses their minds. Miami people are like, oh, Brian, I saw headlines in actual press, actual credentialed media that is like Brian Kelly crying about portal loss. And it's like, it's not really what he was doing. But now, so we'll get into Brian Kelly. I do have a Kalen DeBoer question for you as well. So I got lots of stuff.
And maybe Kalen when you were at Indiana before he was famous.
Him and Michael Penix together at Indiana.
Yeah.
With Kane Womack, I believe, right?
So,
yes.
So there you go. That's the tie there. Yeah.
And you're a recruiting guy, so going back to Kalen and to Brian Kelly questions, you know, being a recruiting editor, you can give us some insight into sort of what the right. I do think we're figuring out what needle to thread when it comes to roster management. It's very tricky, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. But look, I am done with portal. I don't care. I think fans have portal fatigue. I think donors have portal fatigue. I think there's a lot of people that are just like, oh, I don't want to talk about portal or NIL, or I don't want to talk about Congress. I don't want to talk about revenue share. Like, we're all done with that. That is not how I feel about expansion, because I think people need to, not only do I think it's fun, like, hey, should we invite Oklahoma State, or should we invite West Virginia? Should we invite NC State, or should we invite Virginia Tech or Virginia? What about Florida State? I think that's fun. I think it's interesting. And it's happening. It's going to happen. We are going to expand. So
how certain, as someone who I just prefaced by saying I don't follow the day-to-day rumors of it, how certain are you that the SEC will not be at 16 teams in 4 years?
I would say I'm like 75, 80% certain about the 2028, because 2028, after the 2028 season, which is not a short period of time from now, that is a 4 or 5 year. How many seasons is that? 4 or 5. I mean, that's 6 or 7, 5 or 6 seasons. There is language in the college football playoff contract that allows the TV partners who are running this with the conferences to reevaluate everything. It's called a look-in clause. You've got these lawsuits that are now ongoing with the ACC that don't appear to be going anywhere in the short term, but you know that the closer and closer and closer, the ACC is meeting right now. Mm-hmm. And we know that these things always end up in a settlement at some point. It's just where on the scale are we going to get the settlement? And so 2028's, 4 or 5 years closer to 2036. And again, what does that look? We got Congress pushing on the sport as well for revenue sharing, which is coming. Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, is saying this stuff. So I think it's just a confluence of events that kind of, I thought this was like a 2032 kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And now I think it's more like 2028. So I think expansion, I'm 100% confident that we are going to have 2 power conferences running the sport. We already kind of do. By 2035. I thought it was 2032. Now I think it's 2028. So less certain, but still pretty certain.
Okay, makes sense. And I mean, I'm sure you've discussed a lot in the show. I just wish we could go back and figure out a plan to peel football off into its own thing, and we could still have Pac-12 baseball. And if certain teams in the SEC aren't part of the future super conference, we can still have quote unquote SEC baseball, where Vanderbilt and Mississippi State are playing a baseball game that's a conference game, even if they're not part of a future football thing. But that ain't happening.
I do think that's one of the lures of this football breakaway, because I think I was talking to a buddy of mine who is around the North Carolina program, and North Carolina drives all of it.
Is his name Mac?
No, it's not.
Okay.
I did work with Mac for a little bit. North Carolina is the thing that changes all of this. If North Carolina goes along with NC State, Florida State, Clemson, and they break up the ACC, North Carolina will decide so much. They feel more like a Big Ten team, but I've talked to some people. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen behind the scenes at North Carolina. Like, they got to get sort of like their board in line. There's some state stuff that they're trying to work through, like trying to keep NC State tied to North Carolina.
Right.
And North Carolina is going to be the thing that is the first domino. If they choose SEC, which I think, Mitch, I don't know about you, Virginia feels like the Big Ten school, and North Carolina feels like the SEC school. They've got rivalries in the region, great baseball, high-level basketball. Do they bring Duke with them? Does the SEC let them pick who they want to bring? I don't know. But the rumors floating around are kind of different, and none of these are necessarily reported by like high-level sources. These are sort of just rumors. But when you have the Kansas City Star and you have the LA Times and you have some of these other stuff and reporting on this stuff, it gives a little bit more credibility. But the truth of the matter is, to our conversation, it's going to happen. So we know these conversations are ongoing. I can't remember the name of the president of ESPN, who's the former president of ESPN, big North Carolina guy. He floated the idea of the power conferences breaking up and having their own college basketball tournament like 4 years ago. So this is not like some new thing. Like, it's going to happen. So these conversations, whether we like them or not, are happening. And the newest one is Virginia, North Carolina, Clemson, and Kansas. And on the surface, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense because football drives everything. So Virginia Tech, smarter. NC State, maybe smarter. Florida State. Oklahoma State to pair back up with Oklahoma. Those are smarter decisions from a football standpoint. But if you were to go get North Carolina and Duke, and you go get Kansas, and Greg Sankey has said we'd like to, we want to put a little bit more emphasis on basketball. To go to the networks and say, look, we've got Duke North Carolina rivalry, we've got Kentucky basketball, we've got Tennessee basketball, we've got Florida basketball, we've got all these other programs, and we've got Kansas too. That might be one of the first times where basketball actually plays a role, and it sounds like you would be on board with that focus, which would be new.
Yeah, when we were talking earlier, that's the first thing that came to my mind. It's the first major realignment that I've heard of that would even consider a sport other than football. So to me, that's promising because I like many sports. And two things about Kansas. One thing, if this were being floated around 3 years ago, is Kansas even remotely in the discussion? I think the fact that Lance Leipold has made them respectable allows people not to chuckle at Kansas as being a potential member. And like you said, a Kansas-Kentucky basketball rivalry, and Kansas-Missouri was one of the best college basketball rivalries when they were Big 8, Big 12 days. Ferocious. I know I don't know if they played since. Maybe they played once since, but great rivalry.
I think they played like one football game in like St. Louis or something.
Yeah, but I'm talking basketball too, but a great rivalry. So I will defer to you on the likelihood of that happening. But obviously a Duke, North Carolina under the umbrella of the SEC would do a lot for the league's basketball. But then, at what point is it still the SEC? It's just Super Conference A versus Super Conference B.
North and South, baby. I think they should name them the North and South. And just
I've heard of there's been something like that in the past, actually. I'm reading a book about that right now. I'll let you know how it turns out.
Ken Burns documentary.
Yeah, but there's no more of the, it took me 10 years to get used to Arkansas and South Carolina joining the league, and then Texas A&M and Missouri, I still seem weird to me. So like at some point it's no longer the SEC. It's just a group of 20 teams.
Well, I will say the SEC is the only one that has maintained geographic continuity. Like the states are actually touching, and they are kind of in the Southeast. Now, North Carolina doesn't mess with that. That's why North Carolina is so important to everybody. North Carolina is like the prettiest girl at the ball, and like that's the team everybody wants, and they fit in academically with the Big Ten and geographically with the SEC, and they're just a really good program.
So, what are you saying about SEC academics?
I think Texas A&M and Missouri, to your point, doubled the number of AAU institutions in the conference when they joined, and if you're good at math, that's 4. And I think Texas and Oklahoma tripled it. So there you go.
There you go.
Look, Virginia doesn't walk, talk, or act like a SEC school, so I don't know. I do think, to your point about other sports outside of football, the vast majority of fans in every sport in every conference want to go back to regionalized. Like water polo on the West Coast, lacrosse on the East Coast, volleyball in the Midwest, softball in the Southeast, and then like the 80 other sports that institutions play. They all want to be back where parents can drive and see their kids play sports, or you can compete against kids you grew up playing against. Like that is still from the area you are from.
Sure.
A football breakaway allows them to do that. So if you were doing this exclusively on
But can you go back? Can you go back and reform some sort of Pac-12 in other sports?
Well, right now there's still like a conference. What are they called? What's the legal document that like
Pac-2? I don't know. Yeah,
there's still a Pac-2. I don't know what they call them. The documents that like say that it still exists or whatever. We formed the league or whatever. I do think if you were doing it just from football perspective, I think the Florida State Clemson thing, it has to be further considered. But North Carolina, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, like those would be schools I'd be more interested in because it adds a state, which automatically increases revenue, but you don't expand too far, so you're still connected. And so I don't know if you had to pick just for football, where are you going?
I mean, 2 schools just for football?
2 or 4, 2 to 4. Yeah. Go to 20.
Florida State, Clemson, probably, that makes the most sense. I've always, West Virginia, you talk about schools with certain like identities or DNA. West Virginia has kind of a SEC DNA.
Cultural.
Yeah. As does Virginia Tech.
NC State.
Yeah.
Oklahoma State.
Yeah. Oklahoma State. But then we're just naming off schools. We're up to like 22 schools already.
No, I know. I think Virginia. So the rumor is Virginia, Clemson, North Carolina, Kansas. Kansas border war with Missouri, adds a state, adds revenue, huge basketball school. North Carolina is the thing that everybody wants, adds a new state, adds money, adds a new cable subscription package. Clemson in state, tons of rivalry there, still in the Southeast. And Virginia, of course, adds another state. So the Virginia one doesn't feel right. But if you're asking me which one feels culturally more SEC, it's Oklahoma State, NC State, Virginia Tech. Those are the schools that culturally fit more in the SEC. But I am curious because I've talked to, and I told you this, I've talked to Feinbaum on this channel on 440, and he said, I asked him, I go, dude, what if there's a breakaway?
Feinbaum, dude.
Yeah.
Okay. Just asking.
I'm filling in next week too. Come on and hang out.
Okay, dude.
No, if this does happen and we have this football breakaway, should schools in the SEC that are currently in the SEC be concerned if it's going to be all about big brand football? Like Netflix just signed a contract with the NFL.
Yeah.
That is a worldwide distribution platform for football games. College conferences are going to want that level of exposure and quality, and to provide that value to partners, you're going to have big ass games. So how many should teams be worried? And absolutely, Paul Feinbaum was like, yeah, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, like you should consider it. It's something you need to think about. So,
yeah, I mean, no doubt. There's two theories on that. And one is like, they don't want those schools. What do they bring from a television dollar? Then there's another theory that says someone's got to lose those games. Then if you remove the bottom 25%, you're going to have a new bottom 25%. Someone's got to lose all the games. So do those middle class teams want the bottom teams out? Because in those middle class, and I know every program doesn't think of itself like that. I'm just going to let's say South Carolina. They're, I would say, a middle class SEC team. They have good years. They have bad years. They never think that they're going to be at the bottom. But if some of those bottom teams aren't there, someone's going to lose the games. So.
Mississippi State win total this year 4.5. Arkansas win total this year 4.5. Florida is not that team, but they have a win total of 4.5. South Carolina 5.5. I think ultimately what changes that is revenue equity, right? Like where you no longer he who has the gold makes all the rules and gets all the players. It becomes more like the NFL from a roster standpoint, and then therefore you're elevating the bottom and you're lowering the top, right? Like that's what the NFL does with its rules. I don't know if fans want that. I kind of like that idea, but I don't think if you're an Alabama fan, you don't want that. You're like, no. I want to outspend everybody and have all the good players. I want to be the Yankees,
Right. Which we see to some degree when we've seen to some degrees for 80 years, just, spending on coaches, spending on facilities, all that stuff.
Speaking of spending, I want to talk Brian Kelly real fast before we get into win totals. Anyway, those are the rumors. Those are the speculation. Kansas is interesting. I did talk to some folks around Missouri, and I just said, wait, would Missouri really want Kansas in the conference? Because, again, to your point, 90-plus years of rivalry between those two. And I was basically told that if you asked 100 people on campus, you'd get 100 different answers about Kansas. So I think that kind of explains all you need to know about where Missouri's at. They're like, all right. So quickly, Brian Kelly, this is your world here. You cover recruiting. And Brian Kelly caught a lot of flack last week for the buying players comment. We don't buy. We're not going to buy players here. That's not what we're going to do here. And I'm even in that description paraphrasing him.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot more context. They had just gone into the portal and tried to get a couple of defensive linemen. They lost 3 NFL linemen to the draft. They're trying to fill a need. They didn't get any of them. They went somewhere else. Sometimes that's a big deal. Sometimes it's not. But he sits down and he has a conversation and he catches a whole lot of shit for like just saying kind of the quiet part out loud. We yell at coaches to be honest. And then when they are, we yell at them for being honest. I know you saw the comments, and I want to get to sort of what he means by them, but is that how you took his what he said was like, this is exactly kind of how Jim Harbaugh built a national champion, how Nick Saban has always operated, how Kirby Smart's doing it at Georgia, build through recruiting, develop, build culture, pay players plenty because we have great NIL collectives in town, but that we're not just going to pay, if that makes sense.
Yeah, without being privy to exactly what's going on behind the scenes at LSU. First of all, I think these coaches are pretty smart. They know when they say stuff that they're saying things for the right reason. You can interpret it twofold. One is we don't really want a guy on our team. Like we understand we're in this NIL world that you're going to have to pay for players, but we don't necessarily want a guy who is only going to come to a school because we're the highest bidder. Like we've done a lot of, we have a kind of a NIL survey up on our anonymous survey that a bunch of our writers put together. It's on our site, The Athletic. You can check. I think it published Monday. And we've talked a lot, like go to camps and talk to recruits anonymously. And most of them say, I'm not necessarily interested in going to the highest bidder. Like we need something, want to be compensated for my services, but I'm still looking for fit. I'm still looking for all that stuff. So I think that's kind of Brian Kelly's thing. We want a guy who wants to be at LSU for the right reasons. I know that sounds corny. Sure, we understand we're going to have to pay him to a degree, but if he wants $15,000 more and he's going to go to another school that we don't, he doesn't necessarily think it's his best fit, we don't want that guy. He could be a locker room problem, all that stuff. But I think he's also telling his boosters, telling his collective, all his people that, we are in this world. And sometimes a guy like this at a position of need is going to be the missing piece in us competing for a national championship. So we need those resources if we think this guy is worth going above and beyond. So I don't know if that makes, I think it's kind of twofold there where you need to keep reinforcing the importance of having the money. But I also think he's saying, as an old school coach like he is, I don't want to live in the world where I'm just literally using the portal as free agency and just outbidding people because we need those guys.
Yeah, I mean, Saban famously was always talking to somebody else while speaking to the media, right? He was always talking to recruits' parents, right, current players. Like that's how he was communicating. He'd start his bully pulpit at the SEC media event, and he'd be like, "Oh, Cam Robinson, this is what we did with Cam Robinson," and it was always a message to somebody else.
Yes,
I do think there's some of that with Brian Kelly. I just think it's like, I just think it's common sense. Like I do think that what Ole Miss is doing is, I've said it a million times on the show, I think it is one of the more interesting experiments that is taking place in college football, and I can't wait to see how it plays out this year. I think it's going to be fascinating. But at the end of the day, I still think if you want to win 3 or 4 games in a playoff and you want to make it through a brutal SEC schedule and either win a championship or compete for a national title, I still think you have to do what Georgia is doing and do how Nick Saban built
number 1 recruiting classes every year.
I mean, you have to recruit top 5, top 8 classes.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And sorry for the interruption. Like Florida State did it. They built a championship caliber program with heavy portal reliance. They hit on their portal guys from a character standpoint, all that stuff. And this might be a poor example, and I apologize if I'm not correct here because I don't follow the personnel of college basketball like I used to follow. But to me, I look at a program like Arkansas under Musselman, who basically redid his team every year through the portal. It worked like 3 years in a row, and then this past year it didn't work. Yeah. And I know they had some injuries and stuff like that, but when you're rebuilding through the portal every year and you've got X amount of transfers that you're just going to miss from a character standpoint, you're going to miss from a talent standpoint. So that's, to your point, you want 80% of your base talent to be recruited and developed. And it's sort of like Alabama did towards the, they need a left tackle. Let's go get Vanderbilt starting left tackle. We need a cornerback. Let's tell the Toledo cornerback we want you to go in the portal, but you don't go in the portal. So
I love that. Quinyon Mitchell was our top target. He never went into the portal, but he was our top target.
Exactly. So if I were running a program, that's exactly how I'd want to be. I'd want most of my talent to be homegrown, and then you go out and you pick and choose to fill some holes.
Yeah, like honestly, and Bo says, like, I'm torn. I understand where BK is coming from and agree, but also like the spin and the fallout. I agree. I like media beef too. I think it's fun. I think fans yelling at each other is part of the game. It's part of like the Missouri-Kansas thing, right? Like half the Kansas people are like, screw you, SEC, on message boards right now. And the other half are like, SEC. So it's like, that's just the nature of fandom. As Dell says, hotty toddy. So I think, if you look at the 3 best, I mean, if Texas and Georgia are the best 2 teams, they're the ones with the highest win totals, right? 10.5. Bama, Ole Miss, and Missouri are 9.5. LSU's 9, Tennessee's 8.5, Texas A&M's 8.5, Oklahoma 7.5. The other than Ole Miss and to a lesser extent Missouri, every one of those teams I just mentioned are the teams that compete for national championships and build through 80%, 90% recruiting. So again, I think Ole Miss is the most interesting experiment we've seen in this conference, maybe in a long time. But I still put my money on Georgia and Texas because they've built stacked rosters through the sort of more traditional ways. So I just think the Brian Kelly kind of just said the quiet part out loud. Like, paying players is important. It's part of the game, but we're not going to do it just to do it. We're going to do it when it matters, and we're going to do it strategically. And frankly, donors, I think donors should appreciate that. Donors are your guy Seth Emerson wrote this at The Athletic. He's like, and we talked about it a couple weeks ago. Donors are tired of being asked for money.
Totally. Well, I forgot someone had a funny line in something. I've been editing a lot of stuff. It was in Stuart Mandel's weekly mailbag. One of the questions was, and Stu's mailbags are very long and his answers are usually long and thorough, but this was a short answer. The question was,
such a soft-spoken guy. Very many words.
I know. Is it when a school is lagging behind in NIL, who is to blame? Athletic director, coach, boosters, whatever. And Stu's answer was, it's the athletic director's fault because they probably haven't been ahead of the game in realizing how important NIL was, and or they haven't motivated the boosters. But that same athletic director will tell you it's the fans' fault because you're not giving enough money. And I just thought that was very well put.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Okay. All right, let's take a look at some over-under, some win totals. A lot of these are just out. People are betting down LSU. They're betting down Tennessee, which I find interesting. They're betting down Missouri, which I think is interesting as well. Florida is at 4.5. They're betting him down. So I just think in general, because I still work at Athlon. I met you at Athlon. You used to be the managing editor at Athlon. The magazines are coming out, so the rankings are going to be coming out here soon. And it has gotten nearly impossible to do that magazine with the amount of uncertainty in our sport now at this time of year, May and June. I think at media days, we are going to know less about these teams that we cover at that time of the year than ever before, which I think could lead to a more fun product, a more fun sport. But if you're looking at these win totals, who do you think is maybe overvalued currently? Who do you think is undervalued? Give me a couple of teams that you like and maybe you don't like. And I'm not asking you to put any money down.
Yeah.
But I'm just
so
curious.
what's Arkansas at?
Arkansas's at 4.5.
I would go under. I'm concerned about Arkansas. They're 4-8 last year. Wins over Western Carolina, Kent State, at Florida. Nice win, but by 3, and FIU, I believe. I know the roster is different, but last in the league in league games, last in yards per play offensively, 11th in yards per play defensively. I like Taylor Green, the quarterback, dual threat at Boise State, but you get into the whole stepping up competition. How will that play out? So I'm a little, and we talked about this in the pod until Saturday pod the other day about coaches and giving a coach an extra year. How long should leashes be? And the point is, like, there are not very many times when a coach is given that extra year when it works out. Like, and usually if the decision's kind of been made and you're keeping him for financial reasons or whatever, and Sam Pittman, like at the end of the season, that came back, said he's our guy one more year. So, like, I'm concerned about Arkansas. A team I like, and I got burned by them last year in the Athletic top 25. We do a staff poll. I had them by far the highest of any team, but I'm back on the bandwagon. Texas A&M.
Oh, hand right back on the burner.
Yeah, well, as a recruiting guy, I mean, what's there not to like? I know half their signees from that class left, but so Mike Elko took a bad Duke team that was 3-9, 0-8 in David Cutcliffe's last season. They go 9-4, 5-3, and I know ACC is different, all that stuff, but to go from 0-8 to 5-3 in a league in year one is very good. I know this was like the booster circuit talk, but evidently Elko was speaking at an A&M event the other day and said that the defense has a chance to be really, really good, like the best that he's coached going back to his defensive coordinator days. And obviously he's a good defensive coach. I like Connor Wegman at quarterback. So A&M, what's their over under?
Hang on. Bo says, I like this Mitch guy. Bo's a huge Texas A&M fan.
Okay.
They have to get to 9 wins for you to hit this bet, which is, by the way, minus 105. So, the under not 8.5 is minus 115. So I think Vegas feels pretty comfortable about where they pegged Texas A&M. Yeah, they're probably going to be an 8-4 or 9-3 team. I think I've said on this show, I guarantee they're going to beat Texas.
Guarantee.
They're going to beat Texas, and I think that it could be the 9th win. I don't know if it's the 8th win or not. Arkansas is minus 150 to go over 4.5, plus 130 to go under. So Vegas is giving you a little extra there.
I mean, this is a dumb comment, obviously, because gambling's hard, but I looked at the over-unders and they look hard. I mean, like, it's just like,
that's the point.
I know, I get it. That's why I don't gamble. But we used to back in the old days, in the Athlon days, we used to do some over-unders, like, and I just, you look at the schedules, we think we know the teams, and they were just so hard. They're fun to do because you just like, you track. I think you just go under on all of them and hope guys get hurt. Just kidding. Just kidding. Because if you bet an under,
I want everyone to
suck
and everyone to get
go
hurt.
under. So I didn't say that out loud, did I?
Yeah. Just it's live. It's no big deal.
Yeah, it's okay. No one's watching.
I love Florida right now
If you told a Florida fan 10 years ago
that
in 2024 the over under they'd be 4-8. Oh, really? When do we go to 8 game or 6 game schedules? That's probably their reaction.
In year 3 of a head coach who was widely regarded as one of the better hires ever. Like just not ever, but like
I don't know about that.
in the cycle. Like he was of all the coaches widely not a single person was like, oh, that guy's bad. No media, no fans. Nobody's like, that guy's bad. Like it was all considered a very good hire. Now they're a 4.5 win total. Now you got to lay money here because it's minus 140, but I would hammer over 4.5. I think Florida is way better than people think. I think they're going to be one of the more underrated teams in the preseason. I think they've got a chance.
Mertz was really good last year.
Yes, and year two in a system generally is the year that things kind of take off. And he's got DJ Lagway, who's going to go full Justin Fields on they're going to put some packages in for him. So I think Florida now they've got to show some improvement on defense. They went and got somebody to package with the youngest defensive coordinator in the history of college football. And so they're going to help him out with some more defensive coaching staff personnel. But I would hammer the over on 4.5 for Florida, even though, again, you got to take a little bit of the juice there from Vegas. Tennessee's another one that I'm kind of high on. I think Tennessee's going to be.
Cut you off there because one thing when doing over-unders, in my opinion, is even more difficult because when we knew more about the teams and the conference was smaller, you had a better feel for the schedules. Now we're admitting we don't know anything about any of these teams, but you have to factor in a schedule. So you can't sit there and say, okay, outside of Georgia, maybe at the top and Vanderbilt at the bottom, they're like almost like no certainty. So it's like, and that's not a certainty either way. So It's hard to pick an over-under, even more so in my opinion, because we don't know anything about the teams and the schedules are so wacky.
Well, for example, Oklahoma and Florida have what appear to be on paper incredibly difficult schedules, which I think is depressing their preseason expectations a little bit. It's keeping them down because Florida's back half of their schedule is just absolutely brutal. It's insane how tough Florida's schedule is in the back half. They've got A&M and Miami, which normally would be considered very difficult games. Maybe not. Maybe they are much better. Those are also two teams that if you pick to be very high, you're putting your hand back on the burner with Miami and Texas A&M. I think you want Texas A&M in the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season. I like Mike Elko a lot. I think it's a great hire. I think they're going to be very good. I think they beat Texas at the end, but I think you want to get them early. And I think Florida at home can get them early. If they beat Miami and they beat, Texas A&M, they're going to get to 5 wins. I think they can get to 6, maybe even 7. So I would hammer the over again, some juice there. Tennessee's interesting to me. I really think Tennessee is a team that can make the playoff, that they can go 10-2 and make the playoff. I think they're going to lose to Georgia on the road. All they got to do is basically go 2-1 against Alabama at home, Oklahoma on the road, and Florida at home, basically. And if you can go 2-1 in that stretch, you could still
seems manageable.
It seems manageable. So, but Vegas is telling you that lots of people are they're minus 170 to go over 8.5, which means you're going to have to lay a lot of juice to get to that over. So I wouldn't gamble on it, but I really do like Tennessee to be a 10-2 type of team. I think Nico's absolutely the truth. I think it takes him a little bit of time. And honestly, the thing that could keep him out of the playoff is the NC State game. They play NC State in Charlotte week 2.
Grayson McCall is going to throw for 300, run for 200.
NC State's very sneaky good. Look, Tennessee's got the best defensive line maybe in the conference. And they might have one of the best quarterbacks in America. They got a system that has a high floor. The schedule's not as difficult. You get Bama at home. If you're ever going to get Bama at home, you want it to be in year number 1 of Kalen DeBoer.
Sure.
So I like Tennessee to go a little higher. Missouri and Ole Miss. I'm not even going to. 9.5 wins. You're going to bet on Missouri and Ole Miss to go to 10-2. That's so hard for me. I don't know. I see it. I understand it, but that is a lot of trust. I think you're playing with a risky game.
And this is dangerous. And going back to our prediction days at Athlon, you want to try and evaluate a roster for who it is and not look at the name on the jersey. But there's Missouri goes to whatever they went last year, 11 wins. Can they do it again? Did the ball just bounce the right way? I'm not saying that's the case, but there's that mental hurdle that's some of, I think it's just natural to get over with teams that haven't proven it.
Didn't they have to make like a 110-yard field goal
against Kansas State
to beat Kansas State?
Dude made it though.
But also the ball didn't bounce their way in the LSU game.
Yeah, true. I mean, they were. In fact, I was looking at something about them the other day, and like I think that technically they lost that game by double digits. I think, but like that was not. I think it was like a late pick. That was not a double-digit loss. They were.
Yeah, they had the ball with a chance to win the game. I think on the final drive.
It was totally back and forth.
It was a pick six. Yeah, it was a great game. Again, with all the veteran leadership that they've lost and losing Blake Baker, I'm just curious if you can replicate it. I do think the offense is going to be outstanding. Ole Miss is different. Ole Miss is trying to be a championship team, and I just don't know. The fact that Ole Miss and Missouri are 9.5 and Bama is 9.5 is kind of all you need to know about where we're at in 2024.
Yep.
And to your point about not knowing, Oklahoma, if you look at Oklahoma's schedule, Oklahoma ends up getting all of these teams as they are sort of like cycling up. Does that make sense? Like they get Tennessee. Tennessee has been bad for 15 years. Not right now. Oklahoma gets Ole Miss on the road. Ole Miss and Missouri on the road. Like that doesn't include their big games on the road against LSU, hosting Alabama, playing Texas. Like that is on the road against Auburn. Oklahoma's schedule is insane. And they happen to be getting Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Missouri when they cycle up. Now, those teams might not be as good as we think, but they're probably going to be pretty good, right?
Right, but that's the thing too. It's just like all these are assumptions on what we think we know about a team, and I wonder if there's some. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not a huge. I understand how gambling works, but like, is there some built-in? Like the public just thinks, oh, Nick Saban's not there. Alabama, there's no way Alabama can be totally awesome. Like, how much do you think that's factored into their win total?
For Alabama to go 9-3 in the regular season, and you'd have I'd have to look it up to tell you the last time they lost 3 regular season games. It is right now -140. So the public is, the Vegas is telling you like, we kind of think 9-3. And I do have a question about Kalen DeBoer coming up in a second, but if you want the overs where you can make money. If you think they're going to be pretty good, that Jalen Milroe figures out Kalen DeBoer's system and that they still have one of the top 5 rosters in America and they can run through a very difficult schedule, which includes some really big games, right? But they get some of those at home. They got to go to LSU, but they get Georgia at home. They get Wisconsin early in the season, which I think is good, in Camp Randall. Just a great football game, by the way, Alabama at Wisconsin. But I think I might take the over on that and go 10-2 for Bama and take my +120. But that's not one that I love because I just don't know what to expect with Kalen. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere he's been.
Oh, yeah.
And Jalen Milroe was damn good last year. So one of the questions I was going to ask you on the show is what is a reasonable expectation for Kalen DeBoer short-term and long-term? Because we know Alabama fans are not reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rational to expect to replicate what's happened. I think it is fair expectation that Kalen DeBoer wins a national championship at Alabama. I think that's a fair expectation for every coach. You've got to recalibrate what you think of this program. It's just not rational. And we were already seeing that. The emergence of Kirby Smart in Georgia kind of changed, and not internally, but kind of at Alabama, they still expected to win every year, but it changed the way we think about the SEC every year. It wasn't just a pencil in Alabama at the top or pin in Alabama at the top who's going to finish at second. So, but I'm a huge fan. I love the hire at Washington. I think Washington probably swung and I don't know if they swung and missed, but there was some, he wasn't the first name you heard there, but he just being a West Coast guy or, a Dakota guy, coach at Fresno State, he just made so much sense at Washington. Yeah. So I'm fascinated to see how this, and his personality, I think he's perfect to, talk about replacing the legend. I think he's perfect for that.
Bo says Elko's going to have a better season than DeBoer. Now here's what's interesting about this. If Kalen DeBoer goes 10-2 or 9-3, and they either make the playoff and lose or miss the playoff, and Mike Elko goes 8-4, they would be a worse football team, and Mike Elko will have considered to have done a better job, perception-wise.
Yeah, and it's all about expectations and perception, and Texas A&M hasn't done it. So the expectations over the next 5 years, I know A&M fans expect to win big, expect to win national titles, but Mike Elko is compared to what has happened today. He will be compared to what has happened to the 5-10 years before him. Kalen DeBoer will also be compared, and that's the same thing.
New wrinkle though. Sarkisian coming in with a playoff bid and Arch Manning 2 years from now as the starter, and now they're picked to go over 10 wins and be in the SEC championship game. If they were to go into Kyle Field and win that game at the end of the year, all of a sudden I think it's sort of like Ohio State and Ryan Day. Like, you could win the national championship, but if you lose to Michigan every year, we're not going to be super happy about it. So
no doubt.
I do think there's an extra wrinkle there with A&M where you're
there's
not
an extra layer of pressure on Mike Elko. He's got the season expectations, and he's got the how do you do in the Texas game.
I don't like over 8.5. That 9-3 seems like a big ask. Oklahoma's at 7.5. I could see the over for them, but that schedule is really, really hard. The one I'm gambling on is Florida and maybe Tennessee. All right, so considering these tough schedules, I had a couple of phenomenon I wanted to float to you that I don't think fans are ready for when it comes to the playoff structure and how it's going to affect how we like the things that we aren't thinking about, right, is sort of how I went into this. And number one, like Georgia's schedule is really hard. And Georgia, they could absolutely be 10-2. And or maybe even like let's say they go 9-3, they could still be the best team in America maybe and go 9-3 from a talent perspective. And there's going to be teams. I would look at Oklahoma. I already mentioned Florida's schedule is really hard. Georgia's schedule is really hard. There is a very real possibility that a 9-3 SEC team is totally worthy of being in the playoff over a 1 or a 2 loss team from another conference. How do you think the committee is going to handle that? And do you think fans are ready for arguing about a 3-loss team to be in the college football playoff as one of the, I guess it would be the 11 best teams in college football?
Yeah, I mean, everyone published it, but the ACC meetings, I edited Nicole Auerbach's story last night about the coaches complaining about this very same thing. There's going to be, Dave Kloss was like a 10-2 ACC team should be in the playoff, but it's just
why?
Right. You have to look at each case differently. And I know the object of a sport is to win and lose. But when you're evaluating which the best teams are, there's more to just wins and losses, especially when you're comparing a 2-loss team to a 3-loss team. That's only one small game difference. And if you're talking about an SEC team that lost at Georgia, at home to Alabama, and at Tennessee, and you're comparing it to an ACC team that lost to Florida State at home and got upset at Duke, no comparison. Now, conversely, I don't want to be an SEC homer by any stretch. There's going to be some ACC teams that, let's say North Carolina has a top 10 team one year. An ACC team loses to North Carolina, Florida State, and then Clemson at home on a bad call. That's a damn good 3-loss team, and maybe they're better than a 2-loss SEC team that had an easier schedule that year. So you got to look at it from both angles, but I don't think you're being naive if you go in and just say this 2-loss team is better than that 3-loss team, because the schedules are so different.
Yeah. Well, but here's what's interesting about this year. I think Tennessee and NC State have outside chances to be 10-2 this year. Now, I don't think NC State's ever done that. So, okay, I hear what you're saying, but there's an outside chance that they both have 10-2 opportunity this year. Obviously, head-to-head would be the tiebreaker. That allows that. Texas and Michigan are absolutely 2 teams that could be fighting for a playoff spot at the end of the season. They will play in week number 2. We're going to get a non-conference game between those 2 teams. Clemson and Georgia, that could be the deciding game. So we do have a couple of them this year where I could actually see playoff teams with the deciding factor. But if you're telling me Wake Forest plays the 70th best schedule and they lose twice to an ACC team, and you've got Georgia who plays the number 1 schedule and has 3 losses, but their losses are on the road to Bama or on the road to Texas, and those are the losses, 2 teams that are in the playoff, let's say, I just think the committee has to do like either way, fans need to be prepared for the yelling. But as Bo said, right, the arguments are coming on this.
I think you have to factor in how handsome Wake's quarterback is. Like if it's Sam Hartman level handsomeness, that you got to factor that in.
Are you just saying that because your son goes to Wake Forest? Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all.
Are you saying that the genetic makeup of the student body at Wake Forest that you've enhanced?
I'm not saying Gabe enhanced. He might have lowered the bar with the scores there when he got in there. So
Obi says SEC will have 4 to 7 10-2 teams. I don't know about that, but I think maybe our point here is there are going to be some teams that are really actually 11-1 or 10-2 quality, But because the SEC schedule is so hard,
you are what you are. Bill
they lost the third game. That's when their schedules are the same in the NFL. All the schedules are the same. Every schedule is identical in the NFL.
Not really, but close. Yes.
No, they are. There's no talent.
Well, no, you can play the NFC East. Someone can play the NFC South that sucks, and then
the gap between Mississippi State and Alabama is not the same as the gap between the best teams and the worst teams in the NFL. It's not even close. It's not even close. Those are the top microscopic percent of human body athletes playing in the NFL. 0-13 can beat 13-0 on any Sunday, and that ain't how college football works. The other one that I think people need to get prepared for is I'm going to use 3 teams that we've already talked about. Ties in the conference standing. That argument is coming too, because I'll use Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Missouri. All 3 teams that have high expectations this year. All 3 teams with great quarterbacks that could end up at 10-2. What happens if they're 6-2 in conference? They're all tied. I don't believe that any of the 3 of them play this year. So they're not going to have a single head-to-head game. Let's say Georgia's Georgia, and they've got 1 spot in the SEC championship game. And let's say Texas loses some games and they're out. Hell, Texas could be in this conversation. What happens? I don't believe the SEC office has put out the tiebreaker system yet. Now, I'm hopeful that strength of schedule will be factored into that, and that's somehow
you don't announce anything until it happens, and then you do whatever's most favorable.
Right. Yeah. But if you're one of those teams, I think you have a legitimate argument inside your own fan base to want to play Georgia or not want to play Georgia. If you're Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Missouri, number one, how do you decide who plays in the SEC championship game? Because they're not going to play this year, and then we'll have identical conference records. Is it like opponents? Is it opponents' winning percentage? Okay, I could get behind that. Is it the committee ranking subjectively?
Yeah, obviously they thought about it, and you say it hasn't been announced. I haven't paid attention, so it probably hasn't been announced. But I'm sure, opponents' winning percentage within the league would seem to make the most sense. What about if Georgia wins it? The 2 teams tied form an all-star team. Like Tennessee, Missouri, and Ole Miss can form the best team and then play Georgia. That'd be pretty cool.
You want Tennessee fans with Lane Kiffin calling the plays? That would be
that would be great. Yes, yeah. Heupel and Kiffin could fight to see who calls the plays.
But here's the other thing that no one's thinking about. Seriously.
Usually when you say no one's thinking about it, someone's thinking about it.
No, I think the office is thinking about, and fans are thinking about tiebreakers. What I'm saying, and Kirby Smart's thinking about this because he's Kirby Smart. He said it 2 years ago, I think, at the SEC meetings in spring at Destin. He's like, there's going to be a situation where you're not going to want to play in the SEC championship game, in theory. Now, if you're Georgia, maybe you don't care. But if you are, I could see Missouri, Ole Miss, and Tennessee fans arguing with themselves about not wanting to play against Georgia, because if you're 10-2 Tennessee, you are probably guaranteed a playoff spot. 10-2 Ole Miss, guaranteed a playoff spot.
I know what you're saying. I'm going to counter that.
You didn't let me finish. Hang on.
Okay.
Going and losing to Georgia gives you the 3rd loss, and I hope that the committee takes that into consideration and doesn't hurt you too bad for a loss to number 1 Georgia, let's say hypothetically. But are we guaranteed that you lose another football game, you're 10-3, and you're still in the playoff? I think there's an argument to be made. You maybe don't want to play that game.
That's my argument. I don't want to live in a world where a committee member who's evaluating football teams thinks you are worse tomorrow than you are today if you go play at the number 1 team or a top 5 team in the country. Now, if you lose 35-0, that's one thing. But as long as you're competitive. See, conference championship games in the past, sometimes the other team wasn't very good. Like Ohio State playing in Iowa or Michigan playing in Iowa. There's no gain there. There's only you can only have a negative effect on your resume. But when a 16-team SEC, when there's no divisions, the top 2 teams are going to be in the top 6 or 7 at worst. So losing a game like that where you belong on the field, no football evaluator can dare think that you're not as good for playing that game. But maybe
I agree with you. No, I agree with you. I don't think you should be hurt if you lose to a team that's clearly like a 2-touchdown favorite and you played an extra game. Now, if you're not that good and you can't compete with Georgia, then do you belong in the playoff? We could go round and round with this. Do you want to take a team that didn't want to play the conference championship game? Nobody wants that. No player is going to ever admit that. No coach is going to admit that. But if you're trying to be cynical about how to get into the playoff, right? It's very complicated.
Would a 2-10 Vanderbilt team in any of your format, would they trump like a 9-3 Ole Miss?
No. If it was
asking for a friend.
If it was an ACC team, probably.
Okay.
Clearly, 2-10 Vanderbilt is better than 9-3 Virginia
Wake
Tech.
Forest. There you obviously. Go. Even though they played twice recently, and Wake won both games.
No, Vanderbilt and Virginia Tech. They will play week 1 on West End.
Yes. Didn't you go to Virginia Tech for no, you were going to
no,
go to
I
Virginia
was going
Tech.
to go to.
Yeah, okay. I forgot your many
to
schools you've been to or
yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
You
decommitted.
I had a long and circuitous recruiting process.
You flipped, right? I flipped late too. So, hey, I had some late drama.
You're going Tulane, right?
Yeah, Tulane. They still have my housing deposit, those bastards.
Do they really?
Yeah. Or my dad's, yeah.
like $36 in 1975?
Yeah, that's funny. You're not that much younger than me, tough guy.
I am much tougher though. There's that. All right. So I think ties in the standings because there's no divisions is something that the SEC is they're absolutely thinking about. They're going to address it. But I just think the arguments with I pray that Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Missouri are all 10-2, 6-2 in the conference, and and all three of them feel like they have a worthy spot in the playoff and the SEC championship game. And they will never play each other, and there's no right or wrong answer. And it's kind of like UCF. When the group of 5, you can complain and moan if you're never given the opportunity to prove it, right? Like the group of 5 is always like, oh, you got to give us a chance. We would absolutely beat you. And then they play a bowl game where like not every player plays for the other team, and there's like this weird shroud of like how much did somebody care or whatever. I think it's be careful what you wish for group of 5. I think that could be the case for this as well. Like Tennessee's like, no, I'd rather be 10-2, not play Georgia and get to the playoff automatically.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also the argument that if you're 10-2 in the SEC, you've beaten some really good teams. You've already proven that you're playoff worthy. And so like, why jeopardize it? I get that too.
I think the committee will do 2 things. I think they will absolutely take into account how difficult the schedules are and possibly put a 3-loss team into the playoff. I think they will also take into account that if you finish second, no matter the tiebreaker in the SEC, and you play an SEC championship game and you lose, that you will not be punished. I think same thing for the Big Ten, by the way. That you will not be punished for playing the extra game that is an elite opponent. I think the committee is going to, but there's going to be some heavy, heavy debates in college football circles about this stuff. So just want you guys.
That'd be a first, right? Debates in college football about who's better.
That's the beauty of it. Yeah. That's the beauty of it. The schedules cannot be equal.
Yeah.
It's just not possible.
We need to go to like a 24-game schedule then.
Are you kidding? More college football?
Yeah.
Sign me up. I'm totally good with that. What are the good folks who are subscribed to Good Journalism at The Athletic get if they subscribe to The Athletic from a college football SEC standpoint? What do you guys got for the good folks?
Well, this isn't college football, but today's Wednesday, I published a story on Dave Magadan for Alabama fans. Hit 525 at Alabama in 1983. 525.
Jeez.
Yeah, so it's the highest ever for a major conference player. I've always been intrigued by that. Knew it was in the record books, and did a story and talked to Dave Magadan, talked to 3 of his teammates, great guys, and kind of revisited that special season. So that's out today.
Was he on the 86 Mets?
Yes, in fact, he was. Funny. So he could not be nicer. I kept texting him, get updates, and be sure I had facts correct. So last night, the night before story published, I said, "Hey Dave, one final question. Just want to confirm that you were on the 86 Mets, but not the postseason roster." And he said, "Right, I was a September 1 call up, so I wasn't on the postseason roster."
So he wasn't on the plane ride back from Houston.
So I texted him. I said, I grew up in Jersey, a huge Yankee fan. I hated that Mets team so much. And, I don't know Dave Magadan other than interviewing him. And I didn't know how he was going to take it. So he responded with a ha, ha, ha. So I was a little worried that maybe I should have kept my mouth shut there. But, yeah, great. Very good major league career. Never been a power hitter, but enjoyed talking to him for that. So, yeah, a lot of good college football stuff as well. We had that huge NIL/portal confidential, what we call them, that published Monday. I was Ari Wasserman, Sam Kahn, and I had a podcast Monday and had a column about the biggest college football villains of the past 50 years. So you can check that out.
Give me a tease on that.
I picked.
Why is it Rex Grossman?
No, my first one was Larry Scott / George Kliavkoff / Pac-12 presidents. Basically, anyone who led to the demise of that. Then I went with Steve Spurrier. I went with Charlie Weiss in his decided schematic advantage. I just think it was when he
Charlie Weiss.
Yes, I thought he was an a-hole. He got to his press conference at Notre Dame. He was talking about how they would have a decided schematic advantage over all of their opponents because.
How about the Clausen family? Jimmy Clausen was pretty hated.
Yeah. So, and then my fourth was Barry Switzer. Just sort of like. Yeah, by the way, as I was doing that, found some research. Barry Switzer was sued by the SEC. Nice. the Southeastern Conference. The security, he really was. Yes. So he had trouble with the NCAA and the SEC.
I would go. Tommy Tubesteak might be high on my list.
He was on the honorable mention list
just for what he's doing to our country right now.
So and what he did to Texas Tech football. Yeah.
And Alabama fans hate it. And it was Houston as well, wasn't he? At Houston?
Cincinnati, not Houston.
Oh, Cincinnati. That's right. No, villains. I mean, Spurrier's are like absolutely one of the best in SEC history. There's no question about that. Cam Newton, I think, is in there because he just kind of pissed everybody off.
Yeah, he was on the honorable mention too. I think it was more the Cam Newton situation than him.
Here's the thing. I don't think that there's many coaches who earn that type of reputation based purely on like performance.
We left off the field stuff. We weren't going to be like the people that like did
like Art Briles and right. I mean, Hugh Freeze is a massive villain in the SEC.
No, I had Hugh Freeze was my 5th.
I think he belongs.
Yeah, like there's my criteria is like who roots against him. Like if you're not a fan of his team, you root against
everyone.
Him. That's why like I think people root against Charlie Weiss, but that was my take. So.
Okay, I just don't. I never thought Charlie Weiss was that offensive. I guess. I mean, he was.
Who are you to tell me who I find offensive?
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I find you offensive at times.
He's offensive to Elastic, but
his offenses weren't very good.
His offenses weren't very good. Like Rich Rodriguez came to mind because he's been sort of like this weird caricature in so many different places. Could have taken the Bama job before Nick Saban took it. But Rich Rodriguez was so good at designing a new scheme that people hated him. But then he also like got kind of booed out of Michigan, Arizona.
Troubles at Arizona.
Like Rich Rodriguez has kind of got an interesting spot in this whole thing. So, okay. All right. Well, I just thought we might have to do a whole show on college football villains. That's a really good idea. So
we
maybe go to the Athletic.
Check out Until Saturday podcast. We did it. So
Until Saturday and go to the Athletic. Pay for good journalism, of course. Please give us a little thumbs up for those of you watching on YouTube.
Oh, no.
And if you are, of course, subscribed on the podcast feed, we do appreciate you guys. I know we've been off. We got Feinbaum again next week. Sorry, boys. So we'll see if I can get you a show next week. But thank you for hanging out. We do appreciate you guys. Rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Seriously, we do appreciate you much, all of you guys in the comments. And for Mitch, you can get to him on twitter.com @MitchLight. My name is Braden Gall. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you guys next time.